Good evening. Tonight I'm going to be talking about new starts in literature, and I'm holding these symbolic flowers in order to represent the new starts that we're all going to be making tonight, being very close to the beginning of 2022. I know a lot of you might feel jaded with the way that political events are going, so I'm going to help you to escape into a world of great literature. So thanks so much for joining me this evening. I think you'll all agree as book lovers that whenever you pick up a new book, you have a wonderful sense of possibility, a sense of all the amazing places that this book is going to take you. And so every book is a new start. Every book that you pick up has a promise of something wonderful in it. And it doesn't have to be a brand new book, it might be a beautiful old book as well. So I'm going to take you on a series of adventures this evening into new starts in literature. And I'm going to start with a book which you might think is surprising as an example of bibliotherapy, because I often don't tend to talk about the darker side of literature in these sessions. We have occasionally talked about ghost stories and detective and crime fiction, but a lot of people love to read crime fiction as a way of escaping and look at the darker side of nature. And this is a book which I found a perfect escape at the beginning of this year. It's called The Girl Before by J.P. Delaney. It was actually published in 2016, but I've only just discovered it, being slightly behind with some kinds of books. And I have to say, I was completely gripped and totally loved it. And it is a book which is very much about new starts as well, which is why I wanted to talk about it this evening, because the premise of the book is that it's all set in a wonderful empty flat in London. Well, it's a house, in fact, which is One Folgate Street. And the heroine of the book, in fact, there are two heroines, Emma and Jane, both move into this house at different times, and the time slips between between the two different narrators. And it's a really fantastic idea for the novel, because this house, which has been created by a very controlling architect, has to be lived in by people that will agree to adhere to the rules. And the architect has drawn up an incredibly complex set of rules, which include not being allowed to leave any pots or pans on any surface for longer than a couple of minutes, having no pets, having no children, having no books. That is surely the worst and most awful rule of the whole lot. And the two women who live in this house, One Folgate Street, at separate times, which slip between the two narrative styles, are both people who've had different tragedies. One of them has lost a child, which was born before it came to term, and the other one has had a terrible moment of being sexually abused. So both of these girls have had terrible things happen to them. And we slowly realise that something very strange is going on in this house. And I won't give you all the twists and turns of the book, because it is a really gripping and interesting read. And I think it actually is very therapeutic as well, because it does have all these fantastic new start metaphors in it, because the girls go into this blank canvas of a flat, and everything is controlled by the internet when they come in. So you don't even have to have a key. You can just walk in because the house senses your presence. The shower knows exactly your perfect temperature for your personal preference, and the house gets to understand you and all your changing ways. And this, many would think, is deeply sinister, but both of the girls initially love the way the house seems to look after them, but they slowly realise that maybe the house actually has a rather sinister aspect. And the architect of the house, who's called Edward Monkford, is somebody himself who had a terrible tragedy. He lost his own wife and child when the house was being built, and they were eventually put into the foundations of the house. It's a classic horror story, some would say, but it also has a lot of strangely positive aspects to it. And I would therefore say it's not by any means a downer of a read. It is an exciting read, and it also has some surprisingly positive aspects, because there's a really lovely part of the book which is very much about the positivity of having a baby with Down syndrome. And that's a really lovely and unexpected joy within this um, quite dark novel. So I'm sure there's probably lots of people out there who love to read crime fiction and might well know J.P. Delaney, who is a hugely successful author. But I think it's a very interesting book to put into the context of New Starts, because the heroines in the book do go through new starts, which have both positive and negative aspects. And ultimately, it is a book that leaves you feeling upbeat, which is what I try to help people do with my bibliotherapy. So I'm taking a different range of books this evening, from the crime novel that I've just described to a few other different genres. And the next book that I want to talk about is a really fabulous memoir, which is called Delvey by Laura Galloway. And this is a beautiful book in itself. Look at how gorgeous it is. It's a book that you want to pick up from your local bookshop or your independent book retailer, and bring back home and spend a beautiful evening, ideally by a fire if you can, reading the novel. But if you can't read it by the fire, then read it in your favourite book nook. And this is a book which tells the true story of Laura Galloway, who moved to live and spend 6 years in the Arctic tundra. So the front of the book tells us that. And I'm now just going to read you a little bit about it, with thanks to Joanne Owen from Love Reading, who actually gave a really lovely summary of the book, which I'm just going to read you a little bit of. She says that Laura Galloway's Delvey is in many ways engaging and illuminating. It's an uplifting ode to doing something different. She says it's a testament to how a person can flourish after fleeing the monotony of the work, spend, socialise, show off on social media cycle of modern life, to live by an entirely different kind of cycle, the kind that's directed by nature's shifting seasons in a unique environmental and cultural setting. Threaded with themes of flourishing through adversity and finding home and love in unexpected places, this remarkable memoir is as stirring as it is gripping. And I can fully agree with that. I've been listening to this on Audible and absolutely loving the experience of listening to it. And now I've got the book itself and I'm reading it too, and it's great for both reading and listening to. And I did find it completely gripping. And as many of you know, I'm not generally a memoir reader. I do love to read the occasional memoir, but I always head instinctively towards fiction. And I really love this book because I know it's true, but it does read as excitingly as a novel, because Laura Galloway describes why she went to live in the Arctic, but she also takes us back into her past, describing her rather troubled childhood and how she had a very difficult time as a young person, how she then became a highly successful businesswoman, and how she rather unexpectedly went off to live with the Sami people in an area of Norway. So I'll just read you a little bit more about it. The author's journey began when a genetic test revealed that she shares DNA with the indigenous Sami people of the Arctic tundra. Having endured a disastrous marriage and growing increasingly dissatisfied with her life in New York City, Galloway ventures to the Norwegian town of Kautokeino. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrongly, ostensibly to discover her roots, but in actuality, discovering herself and her future way of life. Here in this remote reindeer herding region, she meets and falls for a herder and decides to stay even after he leaves her just 6 months later. With only very limited knowledge of the Sami language, Galloway lives a largely solitary life with little money, and yet this life is so much better for her. She says, "Now it is so simple. There's no noise and no distraction. I have to be with myself, whatever that means, in the silence, listening to nature, being still." And you do get an amazing sense of the stillness of this particular remote area of Norway from this beautifully written memoir. And I'm going to read you a little bit shortly so that you can experience that too. She says, "When I left New York, I was exhausted, emotionally, financially, and physically, as if I had been in a giant rat wheel. Galloway is an amiable, amusing companion, never self-indulgent and always honest, not least when writing about her traumatic childhood, the death of her mother when she was only 3, and the unrelenting vindictiveness of her father's second wife, which does make quite harrowing reading. There were times when I was cursing in the car as I was driving, listening to this book, being amazed and horrified at how badly Laura was treated as a small child. It's horrific. But she does overcome, and we see from this book that Laura managed to start a whole new life and become an incredibly independent person living in the Arctic, where the temperatures go as low as -40 degrees. She says, with her 6 years in the Arctic, I've moved between two worlds. And at the heart of this transition, and a consequence of living in nature, her endlessly fascinating companion is the realization that home is inside you and all around you. Home whispers, I am here, when you are most alone. It's been described as a joyous and life-affirming read, and I would very much agree with that description. So let me also just show you the map at the beginning of the book, which I'm showing you the wrong way round. But Laura's adventures take her to the northernmost tip of Norway. And I just want to read you a little bit from the beginning when she says a really interesting comment about writing a memoir. I have tried my best to respect Sami culture by employing a Sami reader for checking of key facts, spellings and impressions. Yet it cannot be underscored enough that Delvey is singularly a product of my urban outsider lens and experiences in this particular culture rather than an insider's view or perspective. And I think that's a really interesting point and a great point to make, that Laura is not giving you an insider's perspective of the Sami culture, but an outsider's perspective from someone who has come from an urban life into this very rural existence. And I love the way that she is very honest about that perspective, and that she's not coming at it as if she's an anthropologist. She's describing it very much through her own honest reaction to being there. So I'm going to read you a bit from the very beginning. There's a couple of bits I want to read you. It is -15 Fahrenheit for the first time I arrive in the Arctic. In Delby, the northern Sami word for winter. A giant LCD screen at Sweden's Kiruna airport displays the temperature. As I step off the plane, it is not the snow or the cold or the bleakness that gives me pause. It is the utter silence, muffling even the idling jet engine of the plane. My cheeks bloom red from the brittle cold as I wait for a taxi next to a sign indicating a parking spot for sled dogs. This is the furthest place imaginable from my home in New York, in both temperature and ambience. The air is completely still and lead-like with the cold, as if words might shatter if spoken. As we drive through the night to my hotel, I'm oblivious to the towering Scots pines and Norwegian spruce that dot the forlorn roadsides and would appear with the golden pink light of morning, laden with layers and layers of snow, creating towering sculptures of spun candy floss. The beauty is singular and it is also deceptive. This is too a place of dark and endless nights, of bitter cold and of survival. The Arctic North in winter is a great void, which is perhaps why I'm so drawn to it. In its nothingness, there is no chaos, no ambiguity. There is nothing to be done except to be there, swallowed by the enormousness of one's surroundings, a bleakness which can either foster a sense of retreat or inspire possibility, depending on your state of mind and what you need at that moment. I love that idea of a space of possibility, and that's very much reflecting your own inner soul. I'm filled with a sense of aloneness that has travelled with me longer than I can remember, which is a part of me. But in the sting of the cold, I also feel something foreign and unfamiliar, and which I thought had been lost to me long ago, a sense of wonder. Now that is what is so lovely about this book, is the sense of wonder that you find within it. And I think that is a perfect theme for the theme of new beginnings in literature, is rediscovering your sense of wonder. And this is a book that very much helps you to rediscover your sense of wonder. And I'm just going to read a little bit more about being alone in this book, because a lot of us have felt very much alone during the pandemic and occasionally have had to self-isolate for periods of time. And this book is a book which actually gives you the positives of being alone. And therefore, it's a great book to read at the beginning of the new year. Hopefully, we won't be spending so much time alone this year, but still, it will give you the inner resilience that you need if you do have to be on your own. When you're alone most of the time, your observation becomes keen. When I walk outside or go to the store, I start to see all the people here that are not Sami, and I wonder about their stories. I notice them now because I am one of them. When I first arrived, I was flummoxed that two small grocery stores filled with Norwegian food would have an entire aisle dedicated to Thai and Filipino food, until I learned that this is a significant minority culture in the north. Women who married Sami men and relocated to Kautokeino and other northern villages. The idea fascinates me. When I think about it as a New Yorker transplanted to the Arctic, with all the steep learning curves in my existence, I marvel at what these women have likely endured in leaving home for a place where literally everything is opposite: tropical temperatures, Buddhism and Hinduism, an abundance of cheap and copious fresh fruit and veg at the market, traded for -40 winters and dark nights. Christianity, a wildly different language and alphabet, mountains of snow, and a culture and environment so different in almost every way. From the stories I hear in the village, the men usually meet these women on vacation, often but not always. The men are considerably older. I see the women in the market picking up food, sometimes with a child or two in tow. The couples marry and then sometimes relatives follow. Many kids in the village are half Filipino and half Sami. There are two kids who are half Sami and half African, and two kids who are half Turkish and half Sami. There are really many outsiders in the village. The goldsmiths from Jules, the foreign women whose partner with Sami men, like Gerlinda and Marit and Stein, who are Norwegian but foreign and that they are not Sami. There's even a woman from Madagascar who married a Sami man and they have a grown son. The Norwegian teacher at the high school is Romanian, and one of the English teachers is Irish. I think about these people more and more and why we all chose this place, or why we chose to stay. I recognise that we are united by our otherness and something else. We stay to face ourselves, to prove that we are strong, that we can survive through entirely dark winters of -40 degrees temperatures that freeze your breath to ice, but also make you remember that you have breath in you at all. And we stay because of a wild and untouched nature that overpowers and stuns and can make you cry. Low white clouds gliding over teapot blue skies, almost brushing the earth on a curve that you can follow with your hand. Auroras that undulate and dance in electric greens and pinks and blues against a Vanta black sky. Never the same, never predictable. A gift that arrives unexpectedly in moments as mundane as taking out the garbage cans on a Monday night. The loamy tundra under your feet. The place makes a home for a particular kind of person, and for this reason. We are all kindred spirits in a way. We are all alone together. So that is Delby by Laura Galloway, which I would hugely recommend as a fantastic read, which very much takes you on an adventure into the extreme north of Norway. And I feel particularly drawn to it right now, also because my brother is in Finland and he keeps sending me wonderful pictures of that northern light, those incredible late dawns and beautiful early sunsets, and also conveying that incredible sense of loneliness, even where he is, which is quite a lot further south than where Delvey is set. So it's a really lovely book, which will take you very much into a new world previously undiscovered, and also give you a great sense of infinite possibility. I'm now going to talk about a very different book, if I can find the right one. And actually, while I'm looking for it, I just wanted to mention something about new starts and new beginnings in literature, which is that if you don't already do it, now is surely the time for you to start your reading notebook. And I know that people that have come to these sessions regularly know that I often talk about reading notebooks, but there are some people who haven't been before, and I'm going to tell you about why it's a great thing to keep a reading notebook. So get a lovely notebook that you like as an object, preferably not too big so that it's not intimidating. You can get these really nice books at places like Waterstones. It should be either blank or lined. And whenever you finish reading a book, say to yourself that you will dedicate one page of your reading notebook to the book you've just read. Write down the title of the book, author, date you finished reading it, place you were when you read it. So if you read your book in the frozen north, perhaps in the Arctic, maybe on a journey, or simply in your own house, or in your back garden, or in a tree, or on a train to Glasgow, all of those are interesting to you when you pick up your reading notebook again and you think, I read that book when I was on a beach in Portugal back in 2020, or it wouldn't have been 2020, would it? It would be like 2018. And then, so you write down where you were when you read the book. I'm just being distracted by Project Bibliotherapy. Hello, saying my copy of The Art of Mindful Reading has just arrived a few hours ago. Fantastic. And actually in that book, my book, The Art of Mindful Reading, I do talk about why you should keep a reading notebook in more depth. So thank you for that, Project Bibliotherapy. So yes, title, author, date you finished reading it, place you were when you read it, and then a few lines about the book. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you wish that person hadn't died? Did you like the narrator? Did you find them annoying? All of those are interesting to write down. And then just a few other comments. Were there any resonances with your own life or people from your life that are important to you? Was there anything that really spoke to you? Were there any quotes that you want to write down? And the joy of having this book, your reading notebook, is that you will then look back on it in years to come and remember your adventures in reading. They'll be chronological. It will be like another diary of your life. And it's different to writing about your reading experiences online, which I know a lot of people do. And I'm not knocking that. That's also a great thing to do. Lots of people use Goodreads and other similar ideas. But if you can write it down in your notebook, it's a lovely thing because you then have a body memory of writing, and it actually helps you to deepen the experience of memorizing what that book meant to you and how you felt about it. So now is the time to start your reading notebook for this year, 2022. If you don't have one already, maybe someone might want to gift you one, or you might find one of those lovely books that you've been given years ago and you put aside being a bit too scared to delve into it. Don't put it off any longer. Start your reading notebook now. Do any of you do that already, I wonder? Let me know if so, because it's a great thing to do. I'm sure that all my bibliotherapy clients will be dedicatedly doing it as we speak. So, moving on to another book about new beginnings. This is Peace Talks by Tim Finch, which was on the Costa shortlist for 2020. And this is a very different book to either of the ones I've just been talking about. It is all about Edvard Behrens, who's a diplomat highly regarded for his work on international peace negotiations. Under his arbitration, unimaginable atrocities are coolly dissected, invisible lines grown taut and frayed with conflict are redrawn. In his latest post, Edvard has been sent to a nondescript hotel in the Tyrol. High up on this mountain, the air is bright and clear. He confides in no one but his wife Anna, who he loves with all his heart. She is always present and yet forever absent. It's a very moving and direct study of frailty, love, and time, loss, and grief. And it's been described as a dissection of what is left when all the noise of machination, violence, and competing stories is stripped away. And I did find it actually a brilliant read, which I would highly recommend to all of you as another adventure in new beginnings in literature. It's a book that pays off rereading more than once because it's addressed in the second person to his wife, the diplomat who is negotiating these peace talks up in the mountains, a place very like where Thomas Mann set The Magic Mountain, which is referred to more than once in the novel, because the diplomat is a very learned man, of course, who makes many references to Greek tragedies, the Odyssey, and other classical works throughout the book. He's talking to his wife, who we realise quite early on is sadly dead. And it is a book which slowly unfolds what's going on. And I don't want to give away too much of it because it's a book that very much surprises you with the revelations as you read on. And I really love it in a different way to the other books I'm talking about tonight, because it's not an upbeat, light-hearted, or even joyful book like some of the books that I might mention this evening. It's more of a thoughtful, revelatory kind of read. And I'm going to read you a small section of it to give you an indication of the style of writing. I must say it's a book full of humour as well. More than that, more to the point, I can hear you saying, you weren't going to have me pin this all on you for long. We are on the highest state of alert here. The security people, they do exist, are constantly urging us to be vigilant. For all we know, there are various factions who want to see those peace talks break up, and who would have no hesitation in resorting to terrorism to bring about that end. I might not be the first target for such an attack. The negotiators from the warring parties, and in particular their leaders, are those most under threat, both from extremists on their own side as well as diehards among their opponents. But as chair of the talks, I've had my own briefings on things to look out for, one of them being, yes, jiffy bags, which have been sent to people in my sort of position at various times and have been found to contain not explosives, in fact, but dangerous chemicals, capable of causing nasty burns, or in other incidences, hazardous powders, including anthrax, which can, of course, prove fatal. Just to give you context, at this moment, he's about to open a jiffy bag that he's really worried about, even though it's actually his birthday, so he knows it might just be a birthday present. The fact is, I should have called security, followed procedures, but having been so convinced it was a bomb one moment, I was just as convinced that it wasn't the next. Hence, my picking up the package, tearing it open, finding it was... Yes, yes, got that. Is there any more to this tale? That's the voice of the wife who interjects every now and then. Suddenly you are sounding irritable, impatient with me, dare I say, more like your old self. Yes, I remembered it's your birthday. Yes, I shouldn't have dismissed your concerns like that. Yes, I miss you. Yes, I love you. But at some point, here's the thing, it wasn't just any old book, it was, some might say, the book. To those of a certain persuasion, at least, the Noble Quran, as the title on the cover described it. I wasn't, as it happened, that surprised. Indeed, at the risk of going all mystical, please don't. Once I had decided that the package did contain a book, the book I thought it would most likely be was the Quran, to revert to the original English rendering I'm more familiar with, more comfortable with, indeed, strange as that might sound. And that was because by then I was certain who the book was from. A little card dropped out right on cue. Noor. A small matter first, it wasn't a birthday card and the book wasn't a birthday present. But please don't think I'm feeling sorry for myself. True, there were no other cards or presents left with my bundle of newspapers on this, my birthday, but the occasion wasn't forgotten by my colleagues, who all signed a joint card which they presented to me at tea time, when there was also a small cake with a candle and a mumbled rendition of Happy Birthday. Of course, the two delegations did not join us. We do not fraternise in this way, and I have no reason to suppose nor even knew it was my birthday. The little card did not suggest so. The message inside read simply, Dear Mr. Behrens, in hope of peace, best wishes, Dr. Noor. I won't go on, even though it's the kind of book you can keep reading endlessly, because it does have this very conversational style and it very slowly reveals to you what is happening. And it is one of those very clever books that keeps its revelations coming at a slow pace. And you do quite often want to check yourself and think, hang on, what happened just there? So it's a book that you sometimes want to reread, and I would very much doing so. It's also great on audio as well. And I am going to be interviewing the author, Tim Finch, at the House of St Barnabas in February. So watch this space and I'll let you know when that is. Hopefully, if events are all going ahead, then that is something like February the 21st. So come along to that if you can. Moving on to another kind of new start in literature. And actually, before I do, I didn't really tell you why that's such a great new start in literature. It's because it is all about coming towards peace and moving towards a peaceful negotiation as diplomats. But it's also about achieving peace within his own relationship with his wife. And that although we know that his wife has died, he is moving towards a new beginning and a new start with the rest of his life without his wife accepting that she has in fact died. So that's what led me to include it in this category. I'm now going to talk about another book called Astonish Me by Maggie Shipstead, which is another fantastic book about new starts, in that it's about a ballerina who keeps having to reinvent herself because she realizes that she's actually not a brilliant enough dancer to take the center stage, and she is going to have to find a different way of being a dancer. Cyber Flaneurs is asking an excellent question there, saying, when you read and listen simultaneously, do you read the book in full twice, in print and on audio? No, I don't, is the answer to that. I actually tend to listen to the book on audio first and then obtain the book and um, read through the whole thing when possible, but also occasionally flick through it and find the parts that I was particularly being overwhelmed by on audio and reading those particular ones. So with Audible, you can make notes on the Audible app by making a little bookmark as you're listening. So I find those bookmarks on the audio version and then find that within the book. Or, you can find out what chapter it is within the audio book. I do very often end up reading the whole book twice, in one way or another, and I love having both options, and I do keep going back to both. But with me at the moment, it tends to be audio first and then reading, but not always. So, Astonish Me by Maggie Shipstead. Thanks for the question, by the way. All questions are very much welcomed. Um, so, some of you may know that I'm a bit obsessed with Maggie Shipstead, having recently talked about her wonderful book, The Great Circle, or just Great Circle, which is all about an aviatrix. And I did particularly adore that book, highly recommended. Astonish Me was a book written previous to The Great Circle, all about a ballerina, and it was published in 2014. And it's an excellent read all about Joan Joyce, a dancer in the New York Ballet Corps. She's good, but she's never going to make principal ballerina, unlike her friend Elaine. It's 1977, and politically the Cold War is in permafrost. That Joan, a few years ago, while working in Paris, engineered a single passionate encounter with a Russian fictional ballet star, Arslan Rusakov. She then, through a series of coincidences, manages to help Arslan escape Russia and defect to the West. And that's really what the book is all about. But then it's also about her subsequent career and the ballet career of her son. And I don't want to give you any spoilers, but I think it's a really fantastic read because it's so full of promise, in the sense of being an amazing ballerina or being someone who is obsessed with their craft, but realizing that they're never going to be the best, even though they really want to be. So it's quite heartbreaking in some ways, but it also is full of other ways of being successful and finding purpose and joy in your life. And I'm not going to talk about it in too much depth because it's the kind of book that you want to discover through your own excitement as you read it. And it's also much shorter than The Great Circle. Great Circle is quite a long book, quite a big fat book, but Astonish Me is only about 300 pages, and it's actually an astonishing novel which has an incredibly satisfying end as well, which is always good in a book. I know a lot of people find it really annoying when you have an ambiguous ending. Moving on to another kind of new beginning and new start in literature, I want to tell you about the wonderful The Smallest Man by Frances Quinn, which is a fabulous novel, which only came out very recently. I only have the audio version, which is why I'm showing you this printed out version of the cover. And this is a novel that seamlessly weaves together history and fiction because it's based on the real life of the short-statured court entertainer of Charles I's Queen. Anne Waring, thanks for your comment. You say you're really enjoying The Great Circle, loving reading about flight when we've been unable to do it for so long. That's a really good point that I hadn't even thought about when I was getting obsessed with aviation a couple of weeks ago. We haven't been able to fly for blooming ages, and that's another reason why Great Circle is such a good read at the moment. So that is very much a book to read now. I'm just wondering if it fits into the new beginnings category. I think it does, in the sense that all books are new beginnings, but I think it's just a great book to read anyway. So thanks for reminding me of that. Anyway, The Smallest Man by Frances Quinn is a wonderful novel about a very, very short court entertainer who is called Nat Davy. Now, the year is 1625, and Nat Davy is unexpectedly taken off to London because initially he's actually sold by his father to potentially go and work in a circus, but he manages to escape that fate and end up in the court of Charles I, living as the Queen's entertainer. And he's actually called the Queen's dwarf. And in his words, he says, "They called me the Queen's dwarf, but I was more than that. I was her friend when she had no one else. And later on, when the people of England turned against their king, it was me who saved her life. When they turned the world upside down, I was there, right at the heart of it. And this is my story." And it is a really fantastic story. I didn't know about The Smallest Man, who was a real court entertainer, and he really was heavily involved with the court of Charles I. Rather wonderfully, Frances Quinn has changed his fate. So if you do start researching about the real hero of the book, who's called Geoffrey Hudson, you will be relieved in a way, or glad to hear, that the fictional character has a different fate to the character of Geoffrey Hudson, who was the real court dwarf to King Charles I and his queen, Henrietta Maria. In real life, Geoffrey was given as a present to the Queen in the similar circumstances to the book, with Nat Davy being given as a present to the Queen. He became popular at court and was given the duty of fetching the Queen's midwife from France. Geoffrey, who is the real court dwarf, did also suffer bullying and ridicule and engaged in a public challenge to protect his name, which resulted in tragedy, and in Geoffrey's case, disgrace and expulsion from the court. So Frances Quinn has been incredibly clever and had a huge amount of fun with the real story of The Smallest Man. But I feel she's made it into a much more brilliant and enjoyable story. And there's some really excellent scenes in this book, which I am sure you're going to hugely enjoy. There's an amazing scene where Nat Davy challenges this hideous bully to a race on a horse, and you're absolutely fearing for his life, thinking, surely you're mad to be racing, galloping on an enormous horse. And I won't tell you what happens. There's also a duel, which is rather fabulous. And really, it's one adventure after another. Beautifully written, fantastic story, and very much a story of overcoming difficulties and embracing your difference, because Nat Davy is a tiny little man who believes that he has no hope when he's a boy, realizing that he's never going to grow to full size, and he seems fated to a life of being completely unable to earn a living. But as the book goes on, we realize that he can indeed play to his strengths and become something far bigger and greater than he ever thought he could. And it's therefore a story that gives you an amazing sense of infinite possibility and a sense of overcoming your own limitations. So it's very much a book all about the possibilities, new beginnings, new starts, and becoming more than you ever thought you could be. So it's another brilliant book to read at the beginning of 2022. Moving on to my next book that I'd love to talk about, we have the fabulous, again, another beautiful cover, Circus of Wonders by Elizabeth Mcneal, which, look at that, it's a gorgeous one in hardback at the moment. It's 1866. In a coastal village in southern England, Nell picks violets for a living. Set apart by her community because of the birthmarks that speckle her skin, Nell's world is her beloved brother and her devotion to the sea. But when Jasper Jupiter's Circus of Wonders arrives in the village, Nell is kidnapped. Her father has sold her, obviously some slight similarities to the book The Smallest Man there, promising Jasper Jupiter his very own leopard girl. It's the greatest betrayal of Nell's life, but as her fame grows and she finds friendship with the other performers and Jasper's gentle brother Toby, she begins to wonder if joining the show is the best thing that ever happened to her. In London, newspapers describe Nell as the eighth wonder of the world. Figurines are cast in her image and crowds rush to watch her soar through the air. But who gets to tell Nell's story? What happens when her fame threatens to eclipse that of the showman who brought her? And as she falls in love with Toby, can he detach himself from his past and the terrible secret that binds him to his brother? That's from the blurb. It is indeed an astonishing story about power and ownership, fame, and the threat of the threat of invisibility. This is by the Elizabeth Mcneal, who wrote The Doll Factory, which is another book which I absolutely loved. And I think you will hugely enjoy Circus of Wonders. I'm going to read you a little section of it, and I am very excited to share this with you because this, in a way, is a book that I would say is the antithesis of Peace Talks, another book that I'm hugely recommending tonight and love. But Peace Talks is very much a book that takes you into a world of questioning, rereading, and enigmatic, wondering what's going on and having revelations. This is a book that's full of joy, energy, and ebullience, and it's one to read perhaps just after you read Peace Talks, because I always think that it's great to have a selection of books that take you into different moods as you go through the winter months. As Nell soared on the ropes, he was shocked by her brilliance. Her arms flung wide, carving through the air as if she owned the skies themselves. There was an ease to her, a rapture, that lightness he glimpsed when she danced. She has moved from potential into something real, something valuable, something that could launch him into London. She could set the whole capital alight. But he cannot afford it. He knows what his ledger says. He crosses the grass and slams shut his wagon door behind him, idling his finger down the columns. There are no surprises. £1,050 rounded down. That is his worth in the world. That is all he has built. It would buy him a pitch for a week and a few thumbnail advertisements in a periodical. He fidgets his moustache. If he had more money, he could plaster the capital with advertisements. London could sing his name from omnibuses, from the sails of riverboats, from every broadsheet. Jasper Jupiter's Circus of Wonders presents Nell, the Queen of the Moon and Stars. He could build her act higher, have her soar from a 20-foot platform, from the basket of a great balloon. In that low tent, she looked penned in, almost forlorn. He picks up a quill, presses the nib into his palm. If only. But there is a way. He thinks of his father's last speculation, 2 ships wrecked on the rocks of the East Indies, crates of tea and silk growing waterlogged, sinking into the sea, a fortune risked and lost. He thinks of Daedalus in his tower, how he had the courage to jump, to leap into the unknown. Victor Frankenstein, striving for more, longing to make his name. There is a man, a debtor in Soho, who would lend him far more than any West End establishment. His press agent has mentioned him several times before, a man willing to share the risk. Jasper has never relied on credit, has always felt his troupe is successful enough, and it has been until now. He's watched Barnum rise, accepting investments, driving himself out of debt. Winston, his greatest rival, borrowed once and was running a 100-horse show within a year. Perhaps Jasper is the fool, not because his tent is shabby or his animals are threadbare, but because he has not seized the chance to make himself bigger. And perhaps, too, he has not been ready. His wonders might have weathered the quiet lanes of Somerset, Hampshire, and Wiltshire, but country folk will be content with a panpipe and a 3-legged dog. The London crowds are different, their palates refined, their tastes discerning. Novelties wilt and rot before they've even flowered. But now, he thinks, leaning forward, Nell is something unusual, something truly new, unnatural. Her birthmarks like constellations, her poise like that of an acrobat. All she needs is a showman's backing. He picks up her photograph and wraps it on his desk. He steels himself, straightens his cravat. He dips his quill in ink. I have lately acquired a magnificent act, he writes. Peacock eye bobbing, a rare and never seen before marvel with performing powers to boot. I am convinced that if I can secure the capital to raise her, her name and mine will be on the lips of every kitchen boy, every governess and every duchess in the country. I would be most grateful if you could pass on my inquiry to the usurer you mentioned when we last met and make inquiries to a suitable pitch for our show. My troupe currently has 11 performers, but I seek to double that. I seek, in short, to be the greatest showman in the country. Risk big, win big, he thinks. That was what Dash always used to say, but he had the cushion of wealth and privilege, each gambling debt waved away by his father. Jasper touches the ring in his pocket. EWD. The letter finished, he takes out a new sheet of paper, as fresh with potential as a clean canvas. As the sounds of revelry magnify and a girl is sick against his wagon, he burns his candles down to stubs. In his mind, the investment is already secured. No, in his mind, the investment is already paid back. His pen scratches letters to all the London newspapers, all the omnibus companies, and last of all to the Queen herself. He will take his troupe to London. Nell will be magnificent, and he will be even greater. So that's Circus of Wonders by Elizabeth Mcneal, and that is indeed a fabulous read which will have you feeling yourselves full of the joy of potential new beginnings, new starts. It might really have you wanting to run away and join the circus. Now, there's a couple of books I was going to mention, but I am running out of time, and I've got a couple of questions to answer, excitingly. So I will just quickly bring to your attention Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendes, which is a really excellent, fearlessly explicit debut novel, which begins with a Jamaican couple, part of the Windrush generation, arriving in a 50s Midlands town, who soon regret their decision to move there, feeling like they've left the Garden of Eden and finding Sodom and Gomorrah. Their son, Jesse, has the odds stacked against him from birth. He's descended from despised migrants, but he stumbles through adolescence feeling racially confused, staring in the mirror. He longs to see a blonde white boy staring back at him. And he applies Brillo pad to his skin to try and make himself whiter. He also makes an overture to his friend Fraser, suggesting that he could be his girlfriend, and that doesn't go down very well. Expelled from his family, Jesse finds lodgings in a London hostel, and he wastes no time testing the limits of his sexual freedom and becomes a prostitute. And this is a book all about new beginnings of a gritty nature. So it's one to read if you're feeling brave about the explicit nature of the novel, but it is a really brilliantly written debut, which I think you will all enormously enjoy as well. Of a slightly different kind of new beginnings, we have the wonderful Becoming Dinah by Kit Daval, which is a young adult novel by the brilliant writer of My Name is Leon. And Becoming Dinah is a coming of age novel about obsession, self discovery, female power, and the people we meet along the way. Dinah's whole world is upside down because she needs to leave her home, the weird commune where she grew up. She needs a whole new identity, starting with cutting off her amazing hair. And that's why we've got this great picture on the cover of the book. And I really love this book. I'm a big fan of Kit Daval. It's a fantastic coming of age novel, and it's very much about new beginnings. We go along with Dinah on her road trip, which is loosely a parody of Moby Dick, but really it's all about her own adventures and how she discovers her identity and sexuality. Now, I have an excellent question which I want to answer from Katie, who wrote into me saying, I'm on the brink of retiring. I'm not old or tired or over. Instead, I feel energetic and excited about new adventures. I feel almost like life's beginning again. I'd love to know what inspirational and not ageist book you'd recommend to kickstart my new life. I love fiction and non-fiction equally. I loathe being defined by age or gender. Also, not overly keen on faux cheeriness. Other than that, I'm open-minded and not very conventional, which is a fantastic question. Thanks so much, Katie, for sending that in. So I've got a few things to suggest, knowing that we're running out of time. Definitely read Miss Benson's Beatle by Rachel Joyce, because that is a wonderful epic read that takes you on an amazing adventure and makes you feel like anything is possible. It's a book that I have talked about previously. If you look on my YouTube channel and go to there's a session all about bugs and beetles that is talked about within that session, and it's all about a woman who realizes that she's in a dead-end job as a teacher, decides to go and fulfill her childhood dream of looking for this golden beetle, which is on the other side of the world, beyond Australia, on a tiny island. And off she goes. She's in her 40s. She's a spinster because it's the 1950s. And I feel that as you're retiring and not old or tired, this is a book that will grab you and make you feel like going off on big adventures. Similarly, Zorba the Greek, which I don't think I've got to hand, by Nikos Kazantzakis, is an amazing novel that gets you energized, full of positivity, getting into the vibe of Zorba the Greek, who is one of the most inspirational, exciting, and fabulous characters in the history of fiction. And it just takes you on a fantastic journey. Again, making you feel like anything is possible and making you want to dance, dancing your troubles away. Again, I did want to mention Elizabeth von Arnim's Enchanted April, which I also think, Katie, would be a brilliant book for you to read because it's set in the 1930s. It's about two women in their 30s who are feeling as if they're feeling old, weirdly enough, in their 30s, but they decide to hire a castle in Italy, on kind of on a whim because it's a rainy, hideous period in London, and they decide the answer to their problems is to go and hire this castle, even though they don't really have the money. So off they go, and they then and they then have lots of fabulous adventures in this castle. And it's a book that makes you feel that there's a world of infinite possibilities, and particularly it is all about the joy of nature and growing things and gardens. And Elizabeth von Arnim is a writer who's very much keen on gardens. She wrote a book called Elizabeth and Her Garden. Cyber Flaneurs, thank you for saying the LibriVox audio to Enchanted April is wonderful. Oh, that's great and free. Thanks so much. I didn't know about that. I'm going to discover that immediately. So it's a beautiful, gorgeous book, which is one that I do recommend a lot because it's so positive and wonderful. Finally, you must read, Katie, Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins, one of my favourite books in the world, because it's all about seeking eternal life and finding ways of achieving eternal life, and then actually wondering whether it's a great idea or not. And it also has the god Pan in the book. It's all about celebrating nature, celebrating positivity, sexuality, celebrating passion, celebrating perfume, being called Jitterbug Perfume, also celebrating beetroots, intriguingly. So, on that joyous note, I'm going to come to an end, but I'd just like to mention that on the 20th of January, on Damien Barr's Literary Salon Instagram Live, we will have a wonderful special evening with Dr. Radha Mudgil, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrongly, who will be talking about her new book, which is called Know Your Own Power. It's a book about dealing with the difficulties that we face, preventing overwhelm, and stepping into our power. That's Dr. Radha, Know Your Own Power. And that's going to be on the 20th of January, Instagram Live. Not sure about the timing. Have a look on this Facebook page. Also, do scroll down on this Facebook page to find our list of books that I've been talking about tonight, which you can also find at bookshop.org on the Damien Barr Literary Salon Facebook page. So join us next week, 20th of January, for the special Dr. Radha, which is going to be a brilliant session. I will be doing another session on my own Instagram Live next week. And in a month's time, in February, on the Damien Barr Literary Salon Instagram and Facebook pages, I'm going to be talking about lighthouses in literature, which is a rich and exciting topic, which I can't wait to share with you. So in the meantime, happy reading. Thanks so much for coming this evening. I will post on my Instagram page the list of books that we have been talking about this evening, and you can also find them, as I mentioned earlier, on this Facebook page and quite possibly also on Damien Barr's Literary Salon webpage. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of January and happy reading. Good night.